welcome everyone. Welcome to this latest episode in the Data Transformation series with Mike Palladino. I'm absolutely delighted to have Mike with me today. I know Mike visited us in Europe recently, and for one reason or another, we didn't manage to catch up on that occasion. So here we are, I suppose, on Teams across the Atlantic. Mike, would you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Patty, for the chance to talk. Um, so my background, I work in primarily the agile space, which is a little different, though, the way that I look at agile. Most people look at it from an IT software development perspective, but I look at it more from a high-performing perspective. How do we bring in teams and move them along to become high-performing teams? So I've been applying that in different ways throughout the company. I work for Bristol Myers Squibb pharmaceutical company, but I also dabble in other things. I teach at Villanova University with evening classes in Agile and project management. I've worked in several different industries and certainly have worked with data and data groups throughout my career as a project manager and Agile coaches. Um, and just a lot of different hobbies, a lot of different activities that I get involved in, and they'll probably come up throughout the conversation today. And of
Mhm.
course, I write for
Mhm.
Data Management University with Anne-Marie Smith. So certainly she keeps me busy as well, and keeps bugging me for more and more articles, which I'm sure I owe her another one yet.
Yeah. And of course, Mike, you're the owner of two dogs, because we just saw the dogs before we came on air there, so we might see them during the episode as well. Mike, I was really intrigued to know you have a title called the Director of Enterprise Agility. Now, I think it's fantastic because it just shows that agility now is going to the enterprise and maybe not just in the IT, the technical areas. What does a role like Director of Enterprise Agility involve?
Yeah, sure. It's actually a relatively new position just in August that they created for me. Initially, when I would join BMS almost 5 years ago, I worked primarily in the IT space. But as I was working with teams, we started realizing Agile is much more, as I said, than software development. It's techniques that can be applied to non-IT organizations, leadership teams, operational teams. And as I was talking to different groups in the organization, we started to realize this role would be much more applicable at a more enterprise level. So right now I'm under the strategy and business development organization, under the operational excellence group. And what's really I find exciting about it is my primary customer and primary sponsor is our chief of staff to the CEO. So a lot of enterprise projects that come down through the LT, through the CEO, myself and my colleagues get involved from that enterprise level. And so I think here's a great opportunity to really show a lot of the skill sets, a lot of the abilities that we can help bring to the company. And instead of doing it more the one-off project level, we're able to do it with projects that go across the enterprise and around the world. We're recently even picked up one of our enterprise projects called Simplification or Simplify. It's how do we really streamline a lot of the work that we do in very simple ways. Can we just, maybe one system is sending out 20 or 30 or 40 emails for reminders. Well, is that really necessary? How do we make these, quicker changes? Let's just make it once a week, once a month. Low cost, simplification of our processes, procurement, HR, whatever it may be. And it's something that's really been gaining speed in the company. So it's really an interesting role that get an opportunity to work with folks at that level to really move the needle and change the culture within our company.
Mm. And like a lot of organizations, Mike, have really struggled, even though the ambition has been there to move agile out of software development into the wider organization. What do you think is the secret to actually doing this successfully? And actually, you mentioned executive support
Sure.
already. Are there other elements, or is that the critical element?
What's interesting, it is, and in a way, what I've done is I've come at Agile a little different when I started. I started as a team of one, and somehow I had to influence 30,000 people in the company. And it started out where I'd go to meetings and I talk and I talk and I talk and I talk. And 3 months later, we're still discussing it. And I said, this isn't going to scale. I'm never really going to be able to, as I say, change that culture. So what I started doing was created a workshop where I took about 8 weeks worth of experiencing Agile. Here's what it feels like, this experiential component, squished it down into about a 4-hour workshop. And I bring people in, and 90% of the time they're playing with Lego bricks, actually doing Agile, running sprints. I give them a project in the beginning, they self-select the teams, they execute sprints, and they see firsthand, wow, look at what we've created. And what it does is it starts generating this buzz. And that's how I was starting to combat, how do I scale myself quickly? As I brought people into this workshop, they'd either come back the next day, a week, a month. I've even had people come back a year later and say, hey, I remember that workshop you did. I've been thinking about that, and I finally have a situation I can apply this. Please come in and help me. So what I started doing is, but instead of me pushing Agile and saying, you need to do Agile, I wanted to create a pull technique. How do I get them to find me through the workshop, through the buzz, through that viral campaign? And over the past few years, I was adding up the numbers the other day. I've given the class about 120, 130 times around the world, 16 of our sites around the world, and it's around 18 or 1900 people have gone through this workshop. And again, I just love the energy that it generates. So what was happening is, to tie it into your question, we started bringing in the non-IT folks, the business folks coming in, and they're thinking, wow, this is amazing. I can apply this to a marketing project, to a commercial project, to procurement, to legal, to all of these other activities. And we even were working with procurement, for example, in writing contracts for Agile work, because we were typically writing lockdown all the requirements and we can't change anything. So we were helping the procurement group actually applying these Agile concepts. And so we started getting recognition throughout the company. And certainly one of the other aspects is every time we had a win, I'd purposely write it up, get it out there, get it posted. But I didn't post it as, look at us, the Agile team. What I had my team do, as I started building out a team, I said, make sure you're focusing on the work, the benefit of what the team has done. We're just going to add a paragraph about, oh, we were able to do this because of Agile. So I always wanted to be kind of a little behind the scenes. I didn't want to be, Agile first, Agile first. And it was kind of funny talking with our CIO, our previous CIO in the past. He really liked the way that we were getting Agile to stick in the culture. And that was a little bit different than maybe some of the other initiatives that they did. Typically, initiatives come in, they're top down, a lot of activity, a lot of promotion. And then usually a year later, our senior leaders go to something else and we lose that momentum. Where I was coming in more grassroots, bottom up, getting it embedded in that culture and just kind of working my way up the organization. And as I was going up and moving over into the different business areas, there was more and more recognition that, wow, there's some applicability here. And as we as a company are trying to streamline what we're doing with the data with drug discovery and accelerating that process, certainly AI is going to play a role, certainly data management is playing a role, but also how do we get the teams to be much more agile, much more flexible so that they're able to work in a much more streamlined way. And that's what's really going to help us move the needle in our company, changing that culture and being able to discover more medicines to be able to help patients faster.
I love it. Like it's so, in a way, the original workshops were nearly an exposure therapy. You nearly allowed people, or you threw them into the swimming pool, and then I suppose they settled into actually learning about Agile within those, and then started bringing some of that back to their own environment. And Mike, I know sometimes when you see this type of approach, people sort of see it as something they might apply to a project. But how does it seep into a mindset, into a culture? That it isn't just something I do for the odd workshop, but it's actually it's nearly a mindset that I bring to everything I do.
There's probably two aspects to it, and one of it is for me to go around to all of these different divisions and say, I'm going into commercial, I'm going into marketing, manufacturing, drug discovery. And for me to be the expert and say, you've been doing your job for 30 years, I know nothing about your environment, but I'm going to come in and make you 10, 20, 50, 100% faster. I have zero credibility. And this concept was by flipping it, I'm showing them what they see. They tell me, wow, I could apply to these 3 locations here. Great, let me help you with that. So they're self-selecting where they think they can apply it. And that was all part of the thinking behind it of, I can't find and I can't figure out what to do, but I'm pretty sure I can help them out. And the other part of it is I share an analogy with them and I say, most groups say, Mike, give me the playbook. Tell me what to do. Tell me step by step. I'll just go do it myself. Very procedural thinking. And I said, no, Agile's thinking differently. So what I explained to them is Agile's very much like the university. So we can say, okay, there's maybe a group of us here. We've all been to university. And as part of that, we have a shared experience. We know what that is. Except when we break it down, we've been to a large school, small school, public school, private school, in the city, in the country, different countries, different languages, different degrees, different activities. We've all had different journeys and different paths, but still collectively we say it's a shared experience. And when my daughters were going to university, they would say, Dad, tell me what to do every single day for the next 4 years so I can graduate university. Now, Patty, I don't know about you, but I can't write a 1,000-page document and say, here, go follow these steps for the next 4 years. Their experience is so much different than what mine was a few decades ago. And as part of that, I can't teach them step by step, but I can teach them principles. I can teach them ways of thinking. So in university, what is that? It's go to class, talk to your professor, study, do the homework, pay your bills, don't stay out too late, don't drink too much, stay away from drugs, get involved in activities. For the most part, you'll probably do okay. And the more that you follow these principles, the easier university becomes. Yeah, you can still get by only following some of those ideas, but the more you follow them, that easier it becomes to get through university. And that's what we try to explain in the Agile world. That's why I can't give you the BMS 1,000-page document, go do this with Agile. But instead, we're going to get you to think about work differently. We're going to help you look for ways to remove waste, ways that can we cut out those meetings here? Why are you asking for this data? Are you really going to use the data? Let's figure out what the core data is that's going to help really make a decision, cutting down the time, cutting down the waste, and even thinking about our projects a little different. In software, you may have heard the Standish group. They did a survey years ago. There's been a follow-up a few years later. And the first time I heard these numbers, I didn't think much about it. 45% of software is never, ever used. Okay, so what? Another stat, the one that was done recently with shared type software, they said about 80% of software is rarely or never used. Okay, yeah, nice numbers. It looks pretty on a graph. But when I finally sat back and thought about those numbers, I said, wait a minute. That means we're going to budget for, collect requirements for, design, build, test, release 45% of something we're never, ever going to use, or 80% of rarely or never use. And we're going to hold up the 20% that is the most critical piece until we've done all this other work. It just doesn't make any sense when you really stop and think, this is what we've been doing over the decades. And we're Agile. I love how Agile really kind of makes us think differently. Is it's much more of an engine. What's the most important thing? Get it into the engine, work for a sprint, typically 2 weeks. Something comes out. Maybe not be fully ready for production, but it's finished. Okay, what's the next most important thing? And keep moving them through the engine so that all of a sudden you're self-discovering what is that 20% that is the most important. And at some point you say, you know what? This is good enough. Another concept in Agile. This is good enough. We can stop here. We have enough that makes sense to release it. Certainly we see this on a daily basis with mobile apps. I'm sure you've seen your apps are constantly being updated. They're doing Agile. They're putting small incremental pieces, small incremental changes. And that's what's happening. Instead of waiting until everything is done, I'm sure you remember the days of Windows. Every 3 to 4 years, it was a massive update, massive impact. We had to stop everyone, do training, change the way that we think. But by stepping back, being much more incremental in how we release, it streamlines and simplifies, and it also gives us an opportunity to show it to our customers, to react to what our customers are saying, and therefore we can make course corrections in real time versus waiting until the end of, say, a year project and getting feedback then. So it's by teaching these concepts, showing people these concepts, they experience them themselves and they can apply it to their own work. They see where they can apply it. So that's where it pulls into understanding, okay, I can see how I apply it to, this leadership team. Yeah, we could do these same techniques with a Kanban board, for example, or we could apply it over here in this particular operational team. I'm going to be heading over to Poland and Munich in January for our 2 sites. They're doing some projects over there, and they want to come up with a way to work faster and be much more interactive. And they're business units. They're not even IT organizations. And I'm just excited to be able to go over and work with those teams firsthand. So a little bit of a long answer to it, but there's just so many elements of how do I get people just to approach this work in a different way than the typical define it, build it, test it, release it.
No, I think it's fascinating. It gives us plenty of pieces to pick at, and to build on. Mike, I suppose, and like the chaos reports would have pointed out that agile outperforms probably waterfall, but one of maybe the criticisms of agile as well is that it becomes too delivery focused, and sometimes we pay less attention of the makeup of teams, how teams engage, how teams interact. From your experience, does agile need to be more than a delivery mechanism?
What I've seen in articles I've read, people I've talked to, going to conferences, where I think some of the failures of agile is, I think people do exactly that. They get caught up in it being delivery, and they get caught up in being stuff. And I think what's helped me is by thinking of it as creating these high performing teams, I think it gets us out of that delivery type of mindset, so that it's more about, if it's high performing teams, how are we communicating with each other? How are we interacting? How do we self-correct? One of to me, the most powerful pieces of Agile is the retrospective. That's where, instead of looking at the work, the requirements, the delivery, we purposely look at how do we work together as a team. We could apply that to any team. It doesn't even have to be an agile team. Imagine applying that to your team at work today. How can we work better together as a team? What worked this last 2 weeks? What should we do more of? What should we do less of? What's the 1 or 2 things we can do over the next 2 weeks to improve the way we work? And it's to me, it's very biological in concept. It's like how the body fixes itself. It heals itself. These kinds of processes are a way that the team is focusing on the team elements, not on the delivery aspect. And what I've just seen is, if we focus on the team first, the delivery piece starts taking care of itself. The processes take care of themselves because the team members are able to have open, honest, more direct conversations with each other. They're going to solve the problems faster. And just one other little side note, I would say, what I've liked is there's been certain areas that when we come in, there was one project at work that they had been running something where between 3 to 4 years, and they weren't quite getting something. They weren't quite getting the traction. So finally they called me in and my team, and they said, can you switch us to Agile? I'm like, okay, we get this all the time. Within 6 weeks, we started switching them. They realized rather quickly that they just weren't set up right for success. They didn't have the right people. They didn't have the right team members, the right commitment. And then as we were talking to the leadership, they came back and they said, we just need to stop this project. We need to stop and rethink this because we did set it up wrong. We did set these things up. So it kept this project from going yet another year. So to me, that's also a success. We recognized this project should not continue. There's success in deliberately stopping work that's not being productive. So yeah, there's a lot of different elements in here.
And that's fascinating, Mike. And I think it's also part of that moving beyond delivery. It isn't just about, the next sprint, etc.
Mm.
So you refer to that sometimes you can have the wrong people.
Oh, definitely.
What is the right people, or what are the wrong people? Though, what are the characteristics you need within an agile team for it to work effectively?
That's a big question. I would say it's elements. I, I probably would boil it down to, are people willing to change the way that they think? I've had quite a number of people come through and types of people. I've even had people that come in and said, "You're forcing me to do this agile thing. I don't want to do it. I never want to do it again." This was a gentleman from a database team.
Mhm.
And it was funny. I said, okay. And I kept working with him and his team. 3 months later, I decided I was switching companies and moving on to another company. And he came up to me and he said, "You can't leave. You have to go talk to my management. I can't go back. I can't go back to the way I worked before. This makes too much sense. Please come convince my management that all of us have to do agile before you leave next week." So people that I thought they're never going to get it, they're never going to make the change. Um, they get it sometimes. It's when you demonstrate it, they see it, they understand it. If we spend too much time discussing the theory behind it, I find I fight them way too much. So what are the people that really don't get it? I think there's people that, dare I say, they're stuck in their way. This is the way I've done it. I've done this for 30 years. This is what got me to this point in my career. What do you mean there's a better way to do something out there and I've never heard of it? Of course not. This is the way to do things. And sometimes they're the folks that I'll battle with. I say it fun, jokingly. But I try to show them, like, no, there is better ways. There are ways to improve. These headaches that you do that you think is really important. Imagine if you didn't have to do them, what it would free up. You don't have to go home and write up status reports until 8, 9 o'clock at night. Wouldn't that be a nice change of pace for you? And again, most people, they get it. They see it. They understand it. Once they've made the switch, a good majority of folks don't want to switch back. But I think there's just some folks that they're just convinced there's no other way to do things. Whatever they're doing is the best way. And they're just going to say, nope, I'm not going to change no matter what. So it really does come down to,
Mhm.
are they willing to try something new, give it a chance, experiment with it, and they might actually like it.
Yeah, and again, that's that point, nearly immersion. Sometimes, Mike, someone has
Mm,
to be immersed in it to
yeah.
realize the value of it. And I think that's a really powerful concept, going back to something you said earlier. Mike,
Yeah.
I'm also intrigued to know that I think you referred to maybe your role is sort of more in the operational excellence, and sometimes we drive projects by metrics, and they might be, operational metrics. But in some cases, we also have to drive projects that deliver value to
Yeah.
humans, and it always intrigues me about, when we have agile teams, do we have people that are naturally sort of empathetic? And sometimes we don't. And I'm not sure those projects teams are as suited to some types of projects that, and especially where there's a sort of a real human need that needs to be satisfied.
Well, two thoughts come to mind. I was jotting them down so I don't forget. Number one was part of the reason I did this training class is, if you ever saw the kind of the adoption curve, it's like a nice bell curve. And on the one side, it's the early adopters. Then you have the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. And I said, if I'm going to make this work, I have to find the early adopters. They're going to make agile work no matter what, whether I'm in the room or not. But let me be in the room, because if I can help them, they'll do it faster. They become the cheerleaders. They become the amplifiers because they did it. Their colleagues see, wow, this project is highlighted at the senior level. If I can get a senior vice president or the CEO to talk about the value of what this project team did, and then I follow along with an article that talks about how agile enabled it. Whoa, okay, maybe this group, that early majority, says, I'm not ready to be first or second, but maybe I'll be second, third, or fourth. Okay, I saw them do it. They did the pain. I'm next. Now I'm working my way up that curve. And in some locations in BMS, I'm now actually hitting the late adopters because people come to me and they say, well, I don't know what this agile thing is. Everybody's doing it, so I guess I better do it. Great. And I call it the domino effect, where you start getting some of those early adopters. They're tipping. You hit the tipping point. If you ever read the book Tipping Point, I think it's around 6% of a company's culture. Well, what's 6% of 30,000 people? 1,800. I'm getting awfully close to hitting that in the company, so that we're changing that culture, changing the thing. And I'm not the only one who's sharing that. I love when I go into a meeting and I have senior leaders that are telling them their colleagues, wow, I love going to my sponsor meetings because we talk about business value that we're delivering, not about IT deliverables. And if I get a senior vice president on their own, unprompted, to say those kinds of things, that, to me, that's gold. That's my internal KPI. And part of it, I'll just add on to this, is to help drive that is I tapped into the concept of experiential learning. And somewhere along the line, we've lost this as humans as we get older. Think about, Patty, when you learned how to walk, did you read the manual or did you just go experiment? When you learned to ride a bicycle, how long did you study for that and read the theory behind weight distributions and the gyroscopic effect? Or did you just get on the bike and figure it out? It's faster that way. Same with driving a car. So that was part of the thinking behind it as well, is I could talk for months, or let me just have you experience it and see what resonates. And to me, there's so many learning objectives, so many things happen in a room for that 4 hours as people talk and interact, and they're going to see things, they see the results on the table. And I'm not the one trying to convince them anymore. They've seen it firsthand, they've experienced it. And what I love about the class, and I always tease every class I've done this with, I tell them not to touch the Lego bricks except for only these set times. So they only touch the bricks for a total of 30 minutes. And I do it for a very specific reason. At the end, we do the readout and I say, okay, look at this table, look at what you've built. Did you learn as you went along? Yep, we had new things we didn't realize we didn't have. Okay, you built them. Yep, we just incorporated them. And I said, okay, if I gave you the entire 4 hours to go build this same scenario, could you have done it? And almost every class has come back and they said, we still would have been in planning 4 hours later. In this case, we've covered this table, and I've got photos of every class. We've covered these several tables worth of stuff that we've built. So they see it. It's visceral. They can't ignore it. It's sitting right there in the center of the room. Wow, we never would have done this following our normal process, the way we do things. We're now getting that experience firsthand. We're seeing it. We've touched it. We've built it. We're excited about what we've built. And a lot of times too, I'll even pull in like their boss, if I can, to come in and be the readout person. So now they're talking to their boss about, look at all the stuff we built, boss. So it drives it even further. The boss is amazed, and I get them hooked into it as well. And I always love when I go to like one of the senior leaders and we talk about agile, and they'll say, well, how do I know it really works? Well, go talk to these 2 or 3 people, your direct reports. They're already doing it. It already works. And it just keeps driving that viral approach that generate the excitement, generate the buzz in the company and the department. And that's how we really try to lift that up and find the right people, find the right mindset, find those early adopters, get them going. They're going to help sell their own departments and drive that level of excitement and interest.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, Mike. And I also think that where people are jealous of other groups that are using it and seeing the results that they've delivered, and they come to you want it. I think that creates a lot of pull, like you said as well. So it's not always top down, the big stories from CEOs. It's sometimes the stories in the canteen where people are talking about their successes. Mike, I want to bring you back to also. It's related maybe to the teams and the way the teams work, and sometimes we call it, the difference between cold data and warm data. Cold data, is maybe data structured in databases, etc. But within agile teams, I'm always fascinated that we need warm data. We need data of what's happening now, what's happening within the agile team, but also what's happening in that area that we're trying to solve a problem in, and being able to access live data essentially. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think part of the aspect of agile is having, as you said, the warm data. Certainly it can work with projects with cold data to say, okay, what do we do with this data that we have over here, the structure, unstructured, whether it's in a data lake, whatever it might be. From an agile team itself, in terms of looking at the data of how they function, having that real-time data, I think, makes a huge difference. Similar to if we're building out a system, for example, I'm kind of using data two different ways. If we're looking at, I'm building a solution, I have several pieces in place, and if we can get the scientists or the business community to look at their real data in real time in this system, we start hooking them as well. So I think it's important having that warm data because it's meaningful. I gave you an idea, and 2 weeks later, I'm seeing it incorporated already. Oh, okay, I've got another idea. 2 weeks later, it pops out again. Oh, all of a sudden now they're hooked because they're seeing their warm data, the real-time data, they're seeing those elements. And then certainly the agile team, the other aspect of data is they're looking at how are we moving through what we're being asked to create, and they're starting to see that accelerate over time. Two quick data points. I had one project I worked on that they thought, our CIO at the time, different company, said, oh, it's going to take you 2 years. You'll be lucky if you get it done in 2 years. We did it in 9 months. I mean, it shocked them. It was like 60%, 40% of the time. I had another project where we were rolling out per country. It was taking 11 months per country. All of a sudden, we're rolling it out in 3.5 months per country. So pretty significant speed increases. So part of that is getting the team excited to see as they're speeding up and progressing, getting the customers to see their real-time data, their things they're actively working on now, because many cases, especially in the scientist community, they're used to projects taking a year or two. Okay, well, something came in and I see it a year later, you kind of lose that connection between it. And as I said, if we're showing them every 2 to 4 weeks, all of a sudden they're much more engaged. So having that warm data, having that real-time feedback, I think, is what helps drives the energy and drives that excitement about doing something in a more agile way.
And like, and I really like that, Mike. But I think there's also one of the demons, I suppose, is confirmation bias.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
we're and like there's a fatigue that sometimes comes from agile. You're constantly iterating, whipping around. Tiredness can set in. There's a danger that we stop listening, we stop hearing, that we've already our mind made up about what that end solution is going to look like. How do we fight that demon, the confirmation bias demon, when it comes to, yeah, the data is there, but are we really listening to it, or don't know?
There's a few things that are put in place to help with that. The one stat that I kind of remind people of, and usually it's not talked about in Agile. Most of the teams, I mentioned the one team that we were 200 people, 7 sites, 5 different time zones around the world. I think we had about 200 people in the 9 teams. What was amazing when we went from what people thought would take 2 years to only 9 months, we were not working evenings, weekends, overtime. They were actually working a 40-hour week. And they were amazed by that because they said, well, we're so used to always working these weird, crazy long hours and getting burned out and driving to the end and the death march at the end. And they said, we're not doing that. Like, this is fun. This is more exciting. So it gives them a chance to hopefully pay attention more. Part of it, what I work with our coaches is, are we building in those mechanisms so that we are asking the questions? Is the product owner sharing that information, getting involved, getting hooked because they're seeing the results? Okay, well, are we getting the right feedback? Is the product owner saying yes or no and canceling things? Says, no, you didn't hear me, you didn't do what I delivered. So it starts to force the team to make sure they're listening to the product owner. But at the same token, I love setting up ways where about every 6 weeks, I ask the product owners to share with their larger customers to say, are we on the right path? Are we on the right track? So it gives them a course correction where all of a sudden their primary customer, they could be external, or saying, yes, this is great, or this isn't quite what I want. It's working with those product owners to make sure we're getting that feedback into the teams, making sure the teams are listening. So it's all part of back to how do we create those high performing teams, focus on the people dynamics. And by doing that, that helps have that confirmation, or not have the confirmation bias, and negate that to make sure we're listening to what's happening, making those proper course corrections.
The power of listening and deep listening. And Mike, I suppose I've also had the scars from working on distributed teams, and I know you've referred there to this idea of, is it 200 people across 5 vendors, across 7 sites, bringing these types of teams together to deliver, actually not on time, before time. Mike, how do you do this? Especially agile traditionally it's all happening in the physical room, whereas now
Yes.
you're using agile across distributed teams. Not easy. So what's the secret?
It's a secret I can't tell you. No. It's a lot of what we did is I hopefully I'm not repeating it too much. I think it still comes down to focusing on the people and the interactions. Some of the techniques I would do, and maybe this will help explain it. One of the first things I do when I work with a team is not focus on the process, not focus on the work. But I'm sure you've been in a meeting where everyone introduces themselves. Yeah, hi, I'm Aurora. What was your name? I didn't catch that. And accents and just all these different elements. No one remembers the names. Our short-term memories usually can only handle 6 or 7 items. By the time you hit the 7th or 8th person, you've forgotten the first. So I'll ask people, when you introduce yourself, give me a word that starts with the same letter. Marvelous Mike, lazy Larry. Give me something. Or talk about an interest or a hobby or something you've done, your last vacation, something that I can hook. This is the way our memory works. How can I hook your name and understand who you are? Whenever people go on vacation, they know when they come back, you're expected to share some vacation photos with the team. Now, I always say, give us the G-rated, give us the clean version. I don't want anything, it's going to cause trouble. But where did you go? What did you do? What did you see? Share it with the team. We had one lady in India. She did a phenomenal job solving this very difficult technical problem. The senior leaders, the senior developers couldn't figure it out for 2 or 3 weeks. She said, I'm going to take a day or two and let me look at it. Great. 2 days later, she came back with a solution. So what I did is I went out and I bought a thank you card, had our site sign it. We mailed it to the second site. They signed it, third site, fourth site, fifth site. About a month and a half later, it finally got to her in India. But what was amazing is we all knew the day she got the card. We're on the call. We're hearing, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, hi, Mayhawk. Well, hello. Oh, Mayhawks, did something happen today? Well, yes, it did. You could just hear the smile coming across the phone. And the fun part was what it did for the rest of the team, because for 6 weeks we kept whispering, did she get it? I don't know. Shh, don't say anything. I don't know. Well, who had it last? I don't know. She's coming on the phone. So it was almost like a pin popped a balloon when she received the card. We're all excited. We're cheering and coming together and patting each other on the back and cheering across the phone. So sometimes it's building those kinds of relationships long distance and over the phone. Surprisingly, I always tell people on our stand-ups, don't put the cameras on. It's 15 minutes, laptop closed. Let's just come in and have a chat. Keep it short, keep it simple. But what I'll do is I'll put photos of people on a piece of paper and I mail that around to the team and they hang it up next to their computer. So they're constantly looking at their colleague's face. They can see it that way. When they talk to them on the phone, they're looking at a face, and it helps build some of that connection without worrying about the cameras and getting everything set up. A 15 minutes, we had one team was 22 people, and our daily stand-up was 12 to 13 minutes total. That's how fast they go. So just part of it was looking at those people dynamics to get them working.
And I think you're right, and I think the dynamics are so important. How do you make sure though, Mike, people are comfortable disagreeing actually, because in some cases we do need that tension where people will
absolutely.
challenge each other, especially when they think something's wrong. But that's
Yeah.
hard enough even when you have people in the room. How do you do it, and especially if the camera is off, when people
Yeah.
are remote to one another?
Well, think of it this way. If you personally need to give feedback to someone, it's usually easier to give it to someone as a friend. I'm sure with our very close friends, we could just tell them the way it is. You're being an idiot. It's a little hard to do it with someone you don't know. So the more I can get teams to know each other, trust each other, share personal experiences. Remote team members, I'll ask them, well, where do you live? Oh, I live in India. No, no, no. What town? Oh, Mumbai. No, no. What sub town? Oh, I'm down in Bangalore. I'm down there, but no, no. Oh, I'm in Electric City. Great. Let's pull it up on a map. If I come to your town, what's the one or two things you would want to show me if I was there? Getting people to talk about themselves and sharing photos of the building that they work in, just to give the visual connection. It's hard to ignore somebody you don't know what they look like. So we try to build a lot of that people component to it. So when they do that, it's easier to share information. But I also explain to the Scrum Masters, go around and have informal chats with everyone. What's happening? What are the frustrations? What are you hearing in the hallway? What are just, sometimes people might have an annoyance, but they don't think it's big enough to bring up in a meeting. So I say to the Scrum Masters, gently put it on the table, put it out there. Don't use people's names, but if there's, say, an issue with the way stories are being updated, hey, I'm just kind of curious, what does the team think about the way stories are being updated? So by the Scrum Master kind of gently putting it on the table, you might start getting, well, yeah, you know what? I think there's a little bit of an issue. Oh, okay, let's talk about that. So I try to get the Scrum Masters to get the team comfortable in the beginning. And then once they start seeing, oh, we solved that, we brought it up and we solved it. Wow, this is not okay. Do it again, do it again, do it again. It becomes a habit on the team. And then the team start bringing it up. Or I'll tell the Scrum Masters, Sue, I think you mentioned the other day you were talking about challenge with the stories. Can you share that with the team, getting them more comfortable sharing and bringing it up. I also ask all the developers when it's time to do the readout, doing the sprint demo. I want each of the developers to share what they've done. I don't want a lead developer. I don't want the Scrum Master to talk about it. That way, each person is being comfortable sharing, talking, interacting with each other to help drive that personal dynamic. So if I can build the cohesion as best I can remote, have these fun activities, that drives it. Our team during COVID, we did a thing, we called it, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was like the house building lunch hour. So we just get together on the phone, no agenda. We just kind of eat lunch together on the phone. And then one or two of us usually had a little bit of a house project, and we do it and talk everybody else through it. Mine was I was changing a light fixture. I had an old light bulb type structure and the light was horrible. So I was putting in a new LED light structure. So they're all laughing at me. I'm on the ladder trying to talk to them, trying to eat lunch. I'm doing the wires, but it was just stupid, silly, fun, goofy, disarming, just relaxing. It's like, wow, they got to see
Creating
people.
bonds.
Exactly, creates the bonds. And somebody else would talk about a project, and it was silly things like that. And all of a sudden, it's more relaxed to say, yeah, I feel like I can trust this person. I can share more difficult information.
Yeah.
And that's what drives that behavior. It takes some time. It definitely takes weeks
Yeah.
and months to build that with a new team. But I talk to the coaches, keep at it, keep pushing for it.
Mm.
It will bring dividends at the end.
That's it. It's the criticality of that psychological safety, really. Mike, I
Yeah.
know, this series is about data. I know you have been engaging sort of with the data community for a long time. What do you think the biggest challenges for the data profession are? Because there's a lot of maybe people within the profession saying we haven't quite become or made data strategic in organizations. What do you think the biggest challenges are within the profession?
I would say it's probably two elements that come to mind. One is around, I think the non-data people have a distrust of data because whether it's human nature, the way we're wired, I've got an experience, I have a thought, and you show me data that shows something else. The first reaction I see is, well, I distrust your data. Prove your data is right. Show me how you've done it. You must have done something wrong because your data doesn't align with my preconceived notion. Certainly you see that on social media. It's, well, this person probably did something, so therefore it's true. Whoa, wait a minute. That was a pretty big leap of thought there. Where's the data behind it? So I think that's the one aspect. Getting people to say, there's good stuff around data. Let's understand it. Let's teach people to understand the aspect of it. I think that's one. And I think the other I would say is visualization. Some of the challenges I personally have and some of the data folks I talk to is they might have great data, but they'll do a data dump, as we talk about. They'll pull up this dense spreadsheet and all this stuff. Like, oh, look at this. Look, it's obvious. Look, it's obvious. And I'm like, wait a minute. To a non-data person, it's not obvious. And I was chatting with Anne Marie Smith a while back, and she turned me on to a great idea. She said, there's a great opportunity for someone who is good at visualizing data, some form of a graphic arts background, with someone who understands the data world, because they can help take this data, bridge it to tell the story. If we're not telling a story, it's hard for sometimes people to understand the raw data, especially if they have that natural distrust on the data. So if we can use it to complement a story, here's a story we're telling, and we have a compelling visualization to go along with that story, I think that's going to resonate a lot more, especially with our senior leaders. If it's just presenting data, then I think the natural instinct is A, I distrust it, or B, I have to do a deep dive into the data, and we've lost the story, we've lost the message we're trying to tell. So
And
trying to find that right balance.
Yeah, and is it even more than that though, Mike? Is there a general data literacy problem in organizations that even if data, okay, it can be presented better, but even when we present it, and if we get beyond the trust issue, we've lots of employees that can't really read data. They don't understand the grammar of pie charts, bar charts, whatever else.
Especially, I think when you get into probability, I think that's probably the biggest one I've seen. I think for the audience, think about rain. What does a 50% chance of rain or 90% chance of rain really mean? Most people say, oh, 80% chance of rain, it's going to rain 100%. And our brains just go to that extreme. And I'm trying to think, there was a story about how many people do you have to put in a room for a 50% chance of two people having the same birthday? So you have 365 days in a year, how many people? So the natural instinct is, oh, probably 180 people, somewhere in that range. And it's extremely low. It's something like 23 people to have a 50% chance of two people sharing the same birthday. So I think our brains just aren't the best wired in terms of understanding things like probability. Plus, I think we start getting people who, a little bit of fun here. I think sometimes our senior leaders are looking for exact answers. Should I do this? Do you know what you're saying? Do you have the right data? And what I've seen people who are presenting data sometimes where, because they understand, well, this is maybe 70% right or directionally correct, they start couching their language, which makes it sound soft and fuzzy. And then the leaders are going, wait, what's going on? You're not sure, you're not confident. Nope, we're going to cancel that. When it might be a brilliant idea or might be a great idea. So I agree. I think there's some literature, it's not literature, literacy around data of understanding, well, what does those numbers mean? What does that probability mean? What is that confidence level? And I think there's a great opportunity to have a way of how do we help them understand how to read it, how to interpret it, and what they might be able to do from, especially at that senior level, to understand what the data really is trying to explain.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, Mike. And I think there's also probably some sort of survey data that shows that in lots of cases our senior leaders aren't really data driven from the point of view of data driven decisions, but they're looking for data to justify decisions they've already made. You know, so
Exactly right.
have we an
Yeah.
issue in organizations that actually our leaders aren't good role models when it comes to data?
Um, I don't think I have a good example yet. Um, 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 I think
Hmm.
it really just comes to the person, their background, their experience, maybe what they've experienced in the past. More engineering oriented or more data focused people might look for the data, but sometimes the data just isn't clean, or sometimes the data just cannot be precise. You know, I always think about commercial future production projections of sales. It is guesswork, but it's educated guesswork, but it can't ever be 100% sure. It's future looking. So the question really comes down to is, are we comfortable with that level of uncertainty, and how do we educate folks to understand what that is? Um, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that one, how to really drive that further.
No, and I think, look, it's a topic maybe for another day. And Mike, I'm
Yeah.
just conscious of time. So there's one thing I really want to come back to and to maybe finish off on that. Um, I'm really intrigued by sort of Lego series play and the role of the likes of making in order to learn, and maybe also making to generate some warm data. You know, what sort of problems have you found that Lego can be used to address, Mike? You know, like are they some strategic issues? Are they more tactical issues? Are they more operational issues? Where does it work?
I'll come back to something you mentioned earlier about delivery. I think the example, because I'm building something physical with bricks, it very easy to connect it to delivery models and delivery thinking. Um, when we start getting into teams that maybe don't have a true delivery focus per se, you know, maybe it's a leadership team talking about ideas and what initiatives do we want to start. It gets a little softer in terms of a project team, a specific deliverable. Um, one of the chat, I had one of a colleague, this was maybe 3 4 years ago. He was challenging me. He said, well, can I come up with a different example using the bricks so that it could help other teams, like maybe a commercial team, or maybe a group like for sales, for example. Well, what would be the Lego equivalent of generating more sales? Well, it's further apart. It's a little more abstract, so it doesn't resonate as strong. But it's, we spent good 6 months trying to come up with other examples and really couldn't find a good way to do it. So I think that's one of the weaknesses. But we did find it's better than nothing. Unfortunately,
Mm.
at least it gets it out there, gets the concept across. It gives a consistent language of things like a retrospective, things like breaking things into smaller pieces, things like, do we have a way of tracking all the work that we're doing and hold each other accountable? So those core elements, I think, still resonate and still come across in the class. But I wish I had a better object to build. I think that's probably the root cause. I'm trying to build something with bricks, so it just falls naturally into thinking around delivery mechanisms.
Mm. That's interesting because we've also seen more recently groups that we've been working with use Lego to model their actual team performance and how well the teams is behaving. And some of them have modeled it as boats out in the middle of the ocean, you know, and all sorts of, I suppose, metaphors that play to show some of the challenges and some of the successes, etc. So really interesting insights from that. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I didn't realize how long we had been talking until I looked at the clock. Absolutely fantastic to meet up online, Mike, and I know we're due to meet up, touch wood, face to face at some stage as well. Mike Palladino, thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, Patty. Enjoyed the conversation.